Hello and thank you for tuning into this episode of the Federalist Files. Today, topic of discussion will be Federalist number 30. It's titled Concerning the General Power of Taxation, written by Alexander Hamilton, released December 28th, 1787. Now, topics included need for taxation provision in government for function, obtaining of loans, and national defense. So this paper just kind of lays out a very, general sense of how there has to be some sort of taxation at some point of commerce, as well as that taxation will be used to help the government function, do its core principles and responsibilities, as well as obtaining loans and the national defense, obviously, which is also a core element of the government. I think that it's weird because the last one I think was written in January. That's why it's weird this one was released December 28th, 1787. So maybe these aren't in a no, but they're supposed to be in a chronological order. Maybe this one was written somehow earlier before the other one, and Hamilton saw it necessary to put the other one in beforehand. I'm not really sure exactly the logistics and the distribution of these papers. Now, in this paper, Hamilton lays out the provision that a general power of taxation shall be built into the proposed Constitution in one way or another. This power in particular is to be used to empower military arrangements and operations, national debts contracted or may be contracted, and disbursements out of the national treasury. And that's what should pay for the debt or debts that are to be contracted. In terms, really, he's just referring to loans and military operations as well. So he starts off here and he states, and I quote, "It has been already observed that the federal government ought to possess the power of providing for the support of the national forces, in which proposition was intended to be included the expense of raising troops, of building and equipping fleets, and all other expenses in any wise connected with military arrangements and operations," end quote. He's just laying it out that there should be a form of taxation. We ought to possess the power. The federal government ought to possess the power to provide for, to support and for military forces. Then he goes on how they're going to instill that. So he states, and I quote, "But these are not the only objects to which the jurisdiction of the Union in respect to revenue must necessarily be empowered to extend. It must embrace a provision for the support of the national civil list, for the payment of the national debts contracted or that may be contracted, and in general for all those matters which will call for disbursements out of the national treasury. The conclusion is that there must be interwoven in the frame of government a general power of taxation in one shape or another," end quote. So I want to say that he continues through these next couple papers, actually going pretty in depth about taxation, I'm pretty sure. So this one he's just laying it out. The federal government should be able to pay off their national civil list, as in their budgets or their concerns, things that concern the federal government. They should be able to pay they should have enough taxation and revenue coming into the national treasury that they should be able to pay off that civil list. And he talks about debts. He talks about military, the actual payment of people that are in the government. There's an emolument that the president, House of Representatives, as well as the Senate gets. At that time, is probably very minimal. At that time, actually, a lot of the founders, they were able to hold regular jobs and then also work in the government. Now, if you're in the government nowadays, because their scope is so much larger than it was then, it's a full-time job all the time. And you, on top of that, you also have staff to support you. It's almost like it's become, politics has become corporatized, if that's even a word. It has become like a corporation. Being in politics, you get this, except you're sitting there asking the American people for money to run your campaign staff. Now, whatever money you're being paid out by the government to do your job, I guarantee you that money isn't getting used to pay off campaign staff or used to pay just staff in general. Once you get into the position, that's not happening. That is all donations from the people themselves and the big corporations that give money. So then Hamilton goes on to get a little bit more detailed about it. So Hamilton states, and I quote, "Money is, with propriety, considered as the vital principle of the body politic, as that which sustains its life and motion and enables it to perform its most essential functions. A complete power, therefore, to procure a regular and adequate supply of it, as far as the resources of the community will permit, may be regarded as an indispensable ingredient in every constitution," end quote. So that's actually really important. The very last sentence: "A complete power, therefore, to procure a regular and adequate supply of it, as far as the resources of the community will permit." That's probably the most important part of it. So it should be an adequate supply. It should not be an overconsumption by the government or an over-taxation from the government. And it's as far as the resources of the community will permit, as pretty much as far as the people themselves that hold the resources of the community will allow you to take from them, I guess, because you can't let it be, 90% taxation on the people themselves. It's just not going to fly, especially in America. It's not going to fly. We are not people that are friendly to taxation in this country. We fought a war over taxation, as well as other things, other civil liberties. But taxation was a big reason why on the list. Now, in other countries, especially countries that have a welfare system, a social welfare system as well, that's much larger than ours, and then on top of that, they additionally have a free healthcare. They have their own free government health care. They pay around 60%. Individuals pay 60%, whereas the businesses actually have a low percentage. They pay around the corporate tax rates in a lot of these countries, and they don't want to say it. It's around 20 to 25%, but the socialist class and the progressive part of the Democrat Party don't want to actually admit that corporation tax is very low, whereas individual tax is actually a lot higher to make up for the system, to make up for the healthcare system. So taxing the rich would actually not, the socialists, if they come to power, this progressive part of the Democrat Party, they can try to tax the rich. It's not going to work. It will not be successful. It'll be a taxation because there's just never been that social welfare program, and there's never been this free healthcare program with a very, very high taxation on both business and the people themselves. Usually it's a low business tax in Denmark, Sweden, all of these they call them socialist countries, but they're really not. They're actually very pro-business. On the business index, they have a higher rating than America does. So, but the difference is they just tax the people, the individual income earners themselves. Imagine working for somebody else and 60% of your day is paying to the federal government. You're not even really paying for yourself. It's not even money that you put in your own pocket. The only thing that actually you can make an argument for that you really gain from that high taxation is your health care, I guess. But the way I look at it, my own paycheck personally, what is taken out for health care isn't even close to, because I get taxed around maybe 25, 26%. It's not even close to 20%. Or 25%. It's not even close to that much, how much I actually pay myself into my own insurance program. And I understand that as well, the employer pays a certain fee too, but that's not a fee that I'm eating. You could make the argument that since you're already paying into the healthcare system, then they don't have to pay your health insurance, and then you get more money in your paycheck. I'm not sure exactly how that necessarily works, because from what I understand, any government-run healthcare program is much less efficient than the free market system. It's something that would have to actually be rationed in time rather than rationed in money. It's a very hard way to explain. It's very complex, and it is a debate that many have had. It always sounds good on paper when you say free healthcare, because then we provide healthcare to everybody across the board. But actually, a lot of our facilities, our emergency facilities, such as hospitals, they actually do provide care to pretty much anyone that walks in the door. By law, they have to do it. And then the people that end up paying for them are the people that are private healthcare insurers. So we actually almost do have a free healthcare system to a certain extent in this country. We don't have, those people can't go and see a bunch of specialists whenever they want. They actually need a real emergency, or really, if they have the cold or something, they can just walk right in, and then they don't have to report where they live. So then when the hospital can't turn them away, the hospital will send the bill to no one. Really, the bill is just being paid by the other people that are going to the hospital. We actually technically really do have some sort of almost like a social healthcare program, because the hospital may eat the cost of that, but then I think the government may give them a huge payout or a surplus package at the end of the year for every single person that's claimed, and then that's just paid from you. At the end of the day, the people that work always pay for the people that don't, and the people that don't want to get health care. So then he continues, Hamilton. He talks about the Ottoman Empire and their inability to impose new taxes, which kind of led to their downfall. He states, and I quote, "In the Ottoman or Turkish Empire, the sovereign, though in other respects absolute masters of the lives and fortunes of his subjects, has no right to impose a new tax. The consequence is that he permits the bashaws of governors of provinces to pillage the people without mercy, and in turn squeezes out of them the sums of which he stands in need to satisfy his own exigencies and those of the state," end quote. So here he's saying Turkish Empire, the sovereign, he's saying the monarch, or like the king at that time, it was almost like the Articles of Confederation. He just laid out, hey, to the states or to the governors of these states, these are the rules. I need this much money, and then the governors would go and they would enforce it. And they would pillage the people without mercy. They would squeeze every single penny they had out of them. So Hamilton outlines, under the Articles of Confederation, the national government had the right to collect revenues, but these revenues were to be collected by the state. The issue with that provision is there is no method of which to collect these taxes, and it is not enforced through any set system. Rather, if this continues, the country will either crumble or use force to confiscate revenues, which is kind of like the scenario in the Ottoman Empire, and that's why he states it. So then he continues, and I quote, "The present Confederation, feeble as it is intended to repose in the United States, an unlimited power of providing for the pecuniary wants of the Union, but proceeding upon an erroneous principle, it has been done in such a manner as entirely to have frustrated the intention," end quote. So he's saying, yeah, there's a unlimited power of taxation, but it's really it's feeble the way it's written into the Articles of Confederation. It's just weak, straight up. But and it's proceeding on an erroneous principle. The erroneous principle is referring to is that the state governors had to impose that taxation. And then he continues on this note. He states, and I quote, "Congress, by the articles which compose that compact, as has been stated, are authorized to ascertain and call for any sums of money necessary in their judgment to the service of the United States, and their requisitions, if conformable to the rule of apportionment, are in every constitutional sense obligatory upon the states." So the state now had their obligation. The state government had to collect the revenues from the people, and the Congress really they can ascertain, or they can claim or appropriate any sums of money necessary that they saw necessary. The problem is that the state governors, or the state governments had to raise the money from the people. Now he goes on to state the consequences of this. He states, and I quote, "What the consequences of this system have been is within the knowledge of every man, the least conversant in our public affairs, and has been amply unfolded in different parts of these inquiries. It is this which has chiefly contributed to reduce us to a situation which affords ample cause both of mortification to ourselves and of triumph to our enemies," end quote. So essentially he's just saying this is an incompetent system. It doesn't work. The contributions have been much less than have been requested from the Congress assembled at this point, and it will lead the mortification of ourselves or the triumph of our enemies, because they do not have the military necessary to fight back. So then, therefore, in this resolution, Hamilton calls for a constitutional power of taxation by the government, which will compound both internal and external taxation methods from the state and federal head. Hamilton stresses that the government must have a general power of taxation. Government needs power to procure a regular and adequate supply of money. Without taxes, the government will subject citizens to continual plunder, or else the government will perish. I guess the problem is that it was not a comprehensive plan when they had taxation through the states, because let's say, there's 13 states and they said each state has to give this exact amount. Then some states were overpaying because they had the or some states were overpaying because they did not actually have the apparatus of commerce that was necessary to fill the void that's asked of them. And then other states would get off big because they easily could have paid that within a couple months of their commerce. And maybe that, and then on top of that, now you're trusting the state governor or the state government with all of this money flowing through. Who's to say that it's the leaky bucket theory and people aren't just taking money as it's going up, almost like when you play the game telephone and you go from one side. When I was in school, we used to do this. One person says a word or says a phrase, and then they pass it all the way across the classroom by whispering it in the person next to them's ear, and then eventually the person at the very end has something that is completely different than what the very first person stated. It's similar to that in a way, because you're getting the money is passing through all different hands, and then you start with, let's say, $100,000, and at the end of the day, you somehow only have $70,000. So I think that's kind of what he's getting at here, or that would be something that would happen in our current system. What's going on? That's definitely happening in our current system. So then he continues. And I quote, taking into the account the existing debt, foreign and domestic, upon any plan of extinguishment which a man moderately impressed with the importance of public justice and public credit could approve, in addition to the establishments which all parties will acknowledge to be necessary, we could not reasonably flatter ourselves that this resource alone, upon the most improved scale, could even suffice for its present necessities. Its future necessities admit not of calculation or limitation, end quote. So here what he's talking about is credit. They can't possibly be able to get credit approved for them if they do not have a legit amount of commerce coming in every single year, and they don't have a legit budgetary number. Whereas like currently in our system, our GDP is, let's say, around 22 trillion every single year. We know we're going to bring in around that much, so it's easier to get loans for a lot of debt that we owe because there's a guarantee that we're making money. It's almost like, and this makes sense. Now, this is why the government loan crisis happened. And it's actually really still ongoing. We have the federal government giving out loans for colleges. They give out loans to students that go to school for liberal arts majors, as well as like psychology or sociology majors, which do not yield a high result once you get out of school. The amount of money that you make on average for a sociology degree, let's say you're a social worker, let's say it's around $35,000 a year. How are you going to be able to pay off $120,000 worth of college debt? Now, if you went to a private bank and you asked for that, you would have to begin with, you have to have someone co-sign on it, just because it's not legitimate. And the second thing is they might not approve you for the loan because statistically, when they look at the numbers, they go, okay, on average, people that graduate with a 4-year sociology degree only make around $35,000 a year. So we're not going to give a loan to this person for this much money at this rate because we know it will almost be guaranteed that this person won't be able to pay it back to us, because those loans, they can also just claim bankruptcy to eradicate those loans from their record. Yes, it'll ruin their credit score for a couple years, but they can do that to decimate their credit. I mean, to decimate the money that they owe. Just get rid of it. Now, the federal government, when they got into it, this is the real problem. They had to, by law, approve every one of these college loans through the federal government. So it didn't matter what your major was. They were going to guarantee you the loan. And then when that happens, you're going to see prices of the market. You're going to see everything skyrocket because now the colleges know they can get away with charging your kid $30,000 a year to go to college because the government's fronting the bill, and it's going to be a guaranteed loan that's given out. There's no question about it. Now, if you go to the bank the bank is rejecting people constantly for these loans for sociology degrees. Now, what the school's going to have to do is they're going to have a comprehensive program where, oh my God, okay, so sociology degrees, maybe it's going to be an extra $20,000, an extra maybe $10,000 a year for that degree rather than an engineering degree. An engineering degree is going to be an extra $10,000, but it's okay. They can still get the private loan because the guarantee of getting a job that's well paying once you get that engineering degree is very high. Maybe they're making double 70,000 of what the social worker's making, the sociology degree person is making. And that's the reason when the federal government gets involved in the market and they throw an artificial wrench into the market in any way, they usually always screw it up. But yeah, so that's that in and of itself. That kind of explains the way that credit works, even federally. If the government did not have a legitimate amount of money that was coming in every year and it was inconsistent or unstable, if the economy and the commerce going on in the United States was considered unstable, then other states would be, or other countries would be less likely to approve the United States for loans when they actually need them. And that's what he's trying to explain here. So then he goes on, and I quote, "And upon the principle more than once adverted to, the power of making provision for them as they arise ought to be equally unconfined. I believe it may be regarded as a position warranted by the history of mankind, that in the usual progress of things, the necessities of a nation in every stage of its existence will be found at least equal to its resources." End quote. So here what he's saying is that there should be, he's talking about taxation, the power of taxation should be equally unconfined. Now, and he states that because in the usual progress of things in nations, the necessities that are needed in every stage of its existence will be found at least equal to its resources. So meaning proportion, he's really just referring to proportionality. So if you have a state that's full of 100,000 people, you will still have the amount of money coming in and the commerce going on that you'll be able to fill the needs of the society from the federal government's or from the government's perspective. If you have a society with only 10 people, then obviously, the taxation and the amount of resources, it's going to be a lower amount, but usually it should be somewhat proportional. And then as your commerce as well as your population grows, so does the amount in terms of money, not the percentage, goes up. The amount of gross taxation that's brought in by the government should go up as the population increases. It should look like this, a positive correlation going upwards, which would make sense. And I'm not even talking about the percentage of money that gets taxed. I'm talking about the actual money in a whole. So if you have a 10% tax rate on everybody and everyone, and on average, the average person makes $100,000. We're looking at $10,000 in tax on average for every single person. So if you have let's say, 100,000 people in your society, when your society eventually increases to 200,000, you will now have double of what you had before. And but the percentage should stay the same. The percentage shouldn't be raising. When you raise tax rates, that just means that there's a bunch of people, or means the government is not spending the way that they should be. They're overspending, or there's a bunch of people that are sitting fat on their rear ends, not doing anything, because it just does not make sense to raise tax rates when before there was either a surplus or we were breaking even every single year and everything stayed the same commerce wise, and maybe we've had an increase in population, but with that population increase, our commerce and our GDP, our gross domestic product, has increased as well. Then there's really no reason for the government to be raising the percentage. I'm not talking about the actual amount of money that they take in, I'm talking about the percentage of the taxation. I think a lot of people would agree with me there. So another rather fascinating reason that the government needs to be able to impose taxes is to ensure the acceptance of loans. If the government cannot collect revenue, they will be unable to receive loans because of fear from lenders that the United States would be unable to pay them back. Which I stated before. Now, during exigencies, as in emergency circumstances, the government would be unable to procure funds to fight back against foreign powers, thus jeopardizing the common defense. And he goes on, and I quote, "In the modern system of war, nations the most wealthy are obliged to have recourse to large loans. A country so little opulent as ours must feel this necessity in a much stronger degree, but who would lend to the government that prefaced its overtures for borrowing by an act which demonstrated that no reliance could be placed on the steadiness of its measures for paying?" End quote. So this is exactly what I characterized before, is you're going to have a system set up where there's no reliance on how much can be brought in and their ability to pay back the money that they had loaned out to them. And then there's going to be nations that would not loan the money because there's no guarantee of them getting the money back. That's another thing that kind of keeps, I don't know about in the next couple of years what's going to happen, but that is for a very long time, the last, I want to say maybe 16 years it's been, we've been in debt for at least 16 years. Maybe in the Clinton era there was a small debt, and then I think Clinton, with the low taxes that he instilled during his presidency, and I mean he also had, I'm not going to like sit here and play politics, but he had a Republican House of Representatives, and I think he also had a Republican Senate that passed the tax cuts, a lot of business friendly policies from Clinton. So I think he made it back up where we kind of broke even. Then we started to see Bush, the spending. And then we saw like a tripling of the deficit when we saw Obama. And then now in Trump era, now the government this year, it's been totally blown out. But the years before, Trump was averaging around $1 trillion in deficit, which is around the same as Obama. So we did not really cut the spending in any way. If anything, we raised the spending as our GDP and the production of American good assets, such as businesses, increased. So did our taxation and the money that the government was taking in from everybody. And they're still losing money at this moment. So that's what's kind of weird. You had the Tea Party movement with the Republicans. They all were bragging, oh, yeah, we're going to lower taxes, whatever. We're going to, cut the spending. And then you got Trump in there. He pretty much like overthrew the Tea Party, and then they're still spending. But Trump did not run on, that's the thing, Trump didn't run on cutting the budget. He didn't run on reforming, Social Security or really doing any of that. So it wasn't expected for him to cut the budget, which would have been nice. That would have been just like a cherry on top for all the people that vote Republican, that believe in low spending. Now, so that's really what he's saying, that no one's going to lend them money. And then he continues on this note. He states, the loans it might be able to procure would be as limited in their extent as burdensome in their conditions. They would be made up upon the same principles that usurers commonly lend to bankrupt and fraudulent debtors with a sparing hand at enormous premiums, end quote. This is very interesting too. So this is also how the government screwed up the housing market too. They did the same thing. They gave these loans out to people that they knew were not going to be able to pay for these houses, and they gave them at really, I think, low rates. And it was just people who were not able to pay them. What he's saying is the premiums are going to be insane if we even can get a loan, considering the burdensome conditions for the loaner, the person that's loaning you the money. You are like the creditor. Oh no, they're the creditor. You're the debtor technically because you're in debt. The premiums are going to be enormous, as in the interest is going to be insane. Next, he states, and I quote, it may perhaps be imagined that from the scantiness of the resources of the country, the necessity of diverting the established funds in the case supposed would exist, though the national government should possess an unrestrained power of taxation, but two considerations will serve to quiet all apprehension on this head. One is that we are sure the resources of the community in their full extent will be brought into activity for the benefit of the Union. The other is that whatever deficiencies there may be can without difficulty be supplied by loans. Now, it's interesting what he's saying here. They should be able to have the unrestrained power for this reason. That's pretty much what he's saying, the whole loan thing. But then, very importantly, two considerations will serve to quiet all apprehension on this head. And this is something you would use to debate liberals when they talk about taxation, and they think that the taxation should be this high or what have you, because usually they like high taxes, but they don't like to pay the high taxes. They always want the rich to somehow pay the high taxes, which, once again, I've explained this before. I think it is the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. I think that's the 14th Amendment. How are you going to make somebody pay double in taxes in terms of percentage than another person? How are you going to make them pay 40% and the other person only has to pay 20%? It doesn't really make any sense. It's not equal. It's not an equal system. It's not a just system. So now what he's saying here, to get back to my point, he was saying it would quiet all the apprehension on the head of these objectors of a unrestrained power of taxation. One is that we are sure the resources of the community in their full extent, this is the most important part here, will be brought into activity for the benefit of the Union. So, meaning it's not going to be used for trivial pursuits. It's not going to be sent to other countries. It's not going to be. We're not going to have this BS. It's supposed to be used to prop up the Union in terms of, like I said, the post roads, the judicial branch, the military. That's really what the core the core of the federal government is, and then obviously the federal government officials. And the other thing is anything that they're deficient in, they can use loans for. Now, Hamilton continues, but he concludes, I guess, his point of borrowing money. He states, and I quote, "The power of creating new funds upon new objects of taxation by its own authority would enable the national government to borrow as far as its necessities might require," end quote. So, creating new funds, having new objects of new things that are going to be taxed, it kind of guarantees that the federal government will have revenue coming in at all points from all different. It's almost like when you have stocks and you buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds, ETFs. It's saying they're diversified in their taxation. They have, one thing here, one thing there. They have something in almost every market, right? So if one crashes, let's say the lumber market crashes, then the other ones will compensate for that crash, or it won't be that great of a loss. If you build a portfolio with nothing but energy stocks, and I'm not talking about Tesla, I'm talking about all the gas, all the oil products. You're going with Exxon, you're going with Valero, you're going with BP. What's the other one? The huge one, I forgot what they're called. Chevron, you're going with Chevron. So you have straight across the board, you have all oil side. You don't buy anything else. There's no diversity in your portfolio. When one of them crashes, you're screwed. All your money's, when all of them crash, or when the oil industry crashes, which right now the oil industry is almost at an all-time 5-year low. It's been pretty much in the dumps since coronavirus started, because the amount of consumption of oil is nowhere near what it used to be. A lot of it is on freight liners, but I personally think it's going to come back, and that the oil industry, oil is kind of in everything. I think it'll come back pretty strong. Also, if they're looking to hype up some sort of crazy tax on the oil industry. But that's the point that he's making here, is because now, since we have taxation on all different objects in the economy, if one thing crashes, we'll still be okay, and it'll also enable us to be able to borrow from other countries. So Hamilton highlights the errors of the Articles of Confederation by stating, and I quote, "Foreigners as well as the citizens of America could then responsibly repose confidence in its engagements, but to depend upon a government that must itself depend upon 13 other governments for the means of fulfilling its contracts, when once its situation is clearly understood, would require a degree of credulity not often to be met with in the pecuniary transactions of mankind, and little reconcilable with the usual sharp-sightedness of avarice," end quote. So pretty much he's ripping people that think that this system, the Articles of Confederation, works. Most importantly, he's pretty much said you would have to have a special degree of gullibleness or believability, just believing people that BS you straight to your face, to think that this system actually works. Now, how is it that if you're the state of New Jersey, you do everything you're supposed to do, you pay the taxes that's imposed upon you by the Congress assembled, and you have let's say another 7 states also do the same thing as you, so it's that 8 states. So then the other 5 decide not to do anything, and now you are in jeopardy and you are at risk because of the other states not doing their job. So what they're saying is the whole is only as strong as the individual parts. I guess you would say the individual parts of the government, but it's not sustainable, because if you have 1 or 2 of them just choose not to pay what they're supposed to pay the government in taxation, then not only do you have jealousy from the other payers or the other states against that state, but you also have a disparity in the amount of money that you're bringing in revenue-wise that you have to somehow make up for in the states that are paying. It's just not I completely understand the point here that he's trying to make. They're only as strong, the whole is only as strong as their weakest link, really, is kind of what he's saying. Now, in other words, a national government that has to rely on each state for revenue will not be in good standing with lenders for loans, and will perpetuate an unstable condition that will adversely affect the national defense. So he concludes this paper with his very last quote. He states, To those who believe we are likely to experience a common portion of the vicissitudes and calamities which have fallen to a lot of other nations, they must appear entitled to serious attention. Such men must behold the actual situation of their country with painful solicitude and deprecate the evils which ambition or revenge might, with too much facility, inflict upon them. He's just really ending it with it's kind of like a mission statement. Yeah, so he's saying pretty much all of the calamities, all of the disasters that we've already had happen, and things that have fallen upon a lot of other nations. We must look at history ourselves and recognize what's currently going on, and we need to change suit very quickly. And then he states, such men must behold the actual situation of their country with painful solicitude and deprecate the evils which ambition or revenge might, with too much facility, inflict upon it. So you pretty much just have to reject those principles, is what he's saying there. And you must look at it with painful solicitude and deprecate the evils, reject the evils. So yeah, that'll conclude this one. It was a little bit, taxation, I think it's just... Yeah, so these next couple papers, he's going to go on talking about the general power of taxation for a couple of papers here until it concludes 36. So he's going to talk about, for the next, 6 papers, talk about taxation. But it's going to be interesting. It'll be all different points that he'll bring up, I'm sure. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. Now, today's Friday. I pre-recorded this as well. I don't really know what's going on currently in our political climate, what happened on the 6th. I'm very excited to see what's going to go on. There will be if you've just watched it, I'm going to be making some sort of, depending on what type of information comes out, I'm going to be doing a current event episode on that information. But that's really it. I hope everyone has a great weekend. There'll probably be a weekend special as well. But thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. Drop the mic. Let people know about the podcast, because I personally can't let people know about the podcast. They keep shutting me down on Facebook. But thank you for listening, and everyone have a great weekend. Thank you.